you're going to look at this. If you do this on your mobile, you're going to go crazy. But it'll give you a sample of the method of actually what happens. Now, this survey is more complicated than 90% that we do because it's longer phrases in the process. Typically, it's much more like that health survey that we showed earlier with much shorter statements like check symptoms. This is more a strategic type of management survey in the process. But it's basically about looking at the characteristics of a customer-obsessed or customer-centric organization. What are the most important things that you think an organization needs to put in place? So if I give you a couple of minutes, and maybe if you're on the mobile, you say, oh, I'll do it tonight. I'll amalgamate the results later. I'll send them on as part. Everybody will get the PowerPoint presentation. Everybody will get the Menti surveys as well that we're doing during the day as part of the delivery. And they'll get the results of this survey as well. So we might not have the results today. But if you can, so the idea as you're looking at it is to overload. There's a logic. When people trust their gut instincts, the core things tend to jump out at them. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to have a go. Some of you have done it already because it was up about 10 or 15 minutes ago. So I'm just going to give you 5 minutes or so to 5 things, up to 5. You can only choose 2 or 3 if you want. But what you think is the most critical things for your organization to put in place if it's really going to transform and become, customer obsessed or customer centric. So I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to do it. And just trust your instincts. Please, it does work. Just another 2 minutes. just one more minute. Okay, so just in case as well people want to ask questions or comments, the code up again. But so before we go on to the next stage, which is designing what we call a customer architecture, a better navigation, a better structure for the web. Any questions? Any comments either on the survey itself or the craziness of it, or no comments? Or yeah. Oh, sorry. This lady.
BlackBerry.
Right.
It doesn't seem to work in the BlackBerry.
Oh, it doesn't seem to work in the BlackBerry. Okay. So that's a technical constraint with survey making. Okay. So one of the things, the European Union being a very political organization, 28 countries, great complexity, they wanted to get a common structure for bringing all these thousands of websites and millions of pages together into a common architecture, a common focus. So this is what got designed based on the top task data. But how did we get to this thing? I'm going to show you a method, systematic, rigorous, evidence-based. It wasn't about smart people in a room. We went back out to customers, and it was the citizens of Europe who designed this. It was a co-design process. So I'm going to show you how it was done. How that got signed off at the cabinet level, the highest level within the European Union of, yes, this is the structure, this is what the European Union is about. This is the essence of the European Union. So the first thing we did, I don't know if you remember earlier, we said there was 77 tasks, 77, 80 tasks, total tasks in the European Union. In building a structure, we call this a top task structure or customer architecture. We architect from the most important stuff downwards. So we set the design off from the key tasks. Everything will fit, all the 77, everything in this structure here, everything. There is nothing within the European Union that doesn't fit somewhere in this structure. So everything the European Union does is covered by that structure. Just some stuff is harder than others, but the top stuff is easiest to find. So we created a structure that was oriented towards the top tasks, that leans to, so it makes it easier to find the most important stuff, and it's harder to find the less important stuff. You cannot make everything easy to use. You cannot make everything equally findable. You know, if you wanted, you could put 30,000 links on the page. Everything is equally findable. Nothing is. You know, so you must decide what is the simplest, because often to simplify, you must remove. You must remove from the structure or put lower down the structure. So what this is saying is the key, crucial things, innovation, funding, law, they're going to be easier to find than the exceptional tasks in the process. So we have to make the hard decisions of what is really important, make that easier, and to make that easier often means removing stuff that is of less relevance. So we have a
Thanks. Is there any rhyme or reason to this page in terms of the order in which they're presented, or is it just a haphazard kind of thing?
No, it's not actually. That's an interesting question. It's first is business, because business is everything now. Job creation, business. So it's the weight it is actually deliberate.
It carries a relative weight, basically.
It carries a relative weight based on the amount of votes that all the tasks fitting under business amalgamate together. So the biggest group of tasks with the biggest vote were under business. So something like 25% or 20% of the overall vote went to business type tasks. So it gets the first part of the structure. A to a Z is just another form of random. You know, to most people, in many situations, you know, the most important stuff gets first in the structure. So there is a deliberate design based on the weight and the importance that they've got to the citizens. And also, there was a bit of a balancing between the strategic view, because the whole drive in Europe was, we've got to create more jobs, we've got to be business friendly, we've got to be driving. So business was seen as, it was very important to citizens, but it was extremely important to the politicians as well. So it was a nice merging of interests that give it its first level of importance.
Where's the search bar? Is it buried underneath these levels?
I'm just showing you the architecture here. This is just part of the page. The search is just above. Yeah, I'm just showing you the structure that came out of it. But the search would come in. The search is awful, but it's on the page. Yeah, search and navigation go hand in hand. People say, you know, oh, we don't need navigation. We don't need architecture. We've got Google. Do you think that the page that's first in Google got there by accident? You know, they architected the hell out of that page to come first. They've SEO'd it. They've worked like hell on metadata, on findability, on using the right words that people search for. You think anybody who's first in Google got there by accident? Google is dependent on a highly architected environment. People work really hard to be Google friendly. They structure the metadata, etc. So Google, that's why Google doesn't work on intranets, because intranets are crap. You know, people don't even want to get found on intranets. You know, oh, if I get found, I get work. You know, hide that content. You know, there's a disincentive to get found on an intranet. Google is dependent on an active population working extraordinarily hard to make itself findable in Google. Information architect, the better the structure, the better the search. The worse the information architecture, the worse the search. Give a search engine, no matter how good it is, 600,000 crappily created pages with no type, or all the same titles, document, document, document. It's not going to do anything. Yeah. So if you've got very poor structure, no matter how good your search is, it's not going to be optimal. But if you've got an excellent structure and a great search, you're going to get fabulous results. So information architecture, the better it is, the better search will be. They are both hand-in-glove activities that need to be designed in combination, in the process. So how did we get here? So we said, we will take the top tasks. So the top tasks are the yellow and the green. So here, that's about 18. Then we looked at tasks that were important for certain segments, or small businesses or stuff like that. You know, that they were top tasks for groups, but they weren't overall top tasks. And then we had a couple of strategically important, like accession of new countries. These were highly political things. So we said, here's the list of stuff that we're going to give people to sort. Because you can't give people 77 things to sort and to organize. It's too different. You've got to select typically about 30 or so things is sortable for most people. So we took a selection of stuff from the entire task list, and we went out to people again, and we said, how would you organize that? So using optimal workshop or whatever. So these 30 came here on the left, and people brought them over to here in the structure. This is the first phase. So you're asking people, how would you organize this? Because there are always patterns in human behavior. There's ways people think about problems. So people would take it, put it over here, and we get about, you need a minimum, you only need 15 people to get reliable data out of this. About 15 people. In the European Union, we had hundreds. Actually, when we did the survey, we had 100,000 people voted. 40,000 people signed up to help test and to help further design the environment. There was a lot of engagement. So typically here you need about 15, ideally 30 or more people. So this is the first phase. It's just a sort, right? So what happens? You begin to see patterns. You can do all this sort of analysis. You get about 15, ideally 30 or more people. You begin to see patterns. So what does that say? It tells you that 87% of the time, people grouped climate change with environmental protection. So you begin to see, how do people group stuff? Here's the thing that you learn as well. People are great at grouping, but they're crap at naming groups. People can group stuff together, but they're terrible at putting names on groups. So do not make it a mandatory thing that they put a name on the groups, because it really frustrates them. So people are very good at grouping stuff, but not good at naming the groups that they've actually grouped in the process. So here, find a job in another EU country, working in another EU country. 80% of the time, those were grouped in the same groups. So you begin to see, you're looking inside the brains of how are people thinking about these problems. These are the best designs. You want something to be easy, make it intuitive. Make it that it reflects how people actually think. So this is the new world of design. It's co-design. It's design with the customer, not for the customer. You are not designing customer journeys. You discover customer journeys, and you design for those journeys that people are already on. So you don't come up with the journeys. You discover the journeys that people are on, and you design for those journeys. Right? So this is just a sort. Right, so you remember you said people are crap at naming the groups, but they're good at coming up with them. We did our attempt to create the groups. Right? This is what the groups are telling us. Right? It's a hypothesis. That's the first phase. Right, so you've done the first phase in the architecture design. What's the next phase? The next phase is you come up with a bunch of questions, instructions, based on your top tasks. So a researcher wants to start a new project, find out if there's an EU grant available. So that's top task number 3, right, in the overall. So you're not just choosing questions out of thin air, you're basing them on top task data. And you're saying, we expect that they'll click on funding. So that's our hypothesis. So you create maybe 15, 20, sometimes up to 30 of those questions. So you've got your, here's what the sorting data we think is telling us, here's the type of structure we think it's telling us, but now we've got to test. Is the structure work? Is the hypothesis right? So we go out to another 30 people or so, and we give them these questions in the process. So, a researcher wants to start a new project, find out if there's an EU grant available. Wow, it's not working. Your target in this should be a minimum of 80% success rate, and ideally 90%. It's almost impossible to get 100% in these sorts of studies for various statistical reasons, right? So 90% is really, in other words, 90% of the time they clicked on funding, the hypothesis is right. It's working. You know, our hypothesis is good, things are good, the architecture is good, things are not good. Something's not working. It's only working 46% of the time. So what happened? this is what happened, right? 40% of the time people clicked on funding, 49% of the time people clicked on innovation. This is extreme.
You just put it in both spots.
Well, hold on. Yeah, you're jumping. You're stealing my thunder. You know, of course you're right. Absolutely. But there's a debate. Well, do we copy? But you're right. Yeah. But there's a deeper thing. There's two journeys in the vast majority of problems. There's two common patterns. Basically, we've done watched thousands and thousands of people. And whether you got any sort of problem, dealing with your health, your battery isn't working on your iPhone or whatever the problem is, there's generally two dominant journeys. There's an object and a subject type of journey. So if you've got 100 people, 40 people will go, oh, let's say my battery isn't working. 40% of people will think, yeah, I've got an iPhone 6 or I've got an iPhone 7. I want to get to the page for that thing. The thing that I have, the object that I have. So they think, and then I look for troubleshooting, or then I look for support. Another 40% will think, no, it's a support problem. I want to get to the support place, I want to get to troubleshooting, then I look for iPhone 6. Or then I look for iPhone 7. So there's the thing that I have, oh, I've got diabetes, or I need to get benefit. How much does it cost to get this treatment? Oh, I'll go the cost journey, or I'll go the condition journey. You say to people in the OECD, for example, did more people die of heart attacks in Canada than in France in 2010? That's a statistically comparative task. Right? Some people will think Canada or France. Oh, that's how I'll go the journey. Other people will think, no, health. I'll go health. So there's these two constant dominant journeys that keep emerging across problems. So 40% will think object, 40% will think subject, 20% will think weird. You know, they'll go all over the place, and you won't know why. It's hard to design for the 20%. But if you can design for the 80%, the two dominant journeys, you can achieve an awful lot in the process. So these two they keep constantly coming up. Some people think this is a funding task. Some people think, no, it's a research and innovation task. If you only design for one journey, you're going to have a hell of a lot less success rate. But in the perfect world, in the world that organizations dream of when they go to sleep, everybody goes to funding, because funding is a specific agency. But if they go to research and innovation, that'll mean we have to put a link for research and innovation funding in the research and innovation area. And that's a hassle. We don't want to do that. That's hard work. Why can't we just bring them all to funding? But they won't come. So you're right, but there's a big implication, which means that, hey, funding needs to go everywhere that it's connected with. It can't just stay in the one little happy place where the funding people say, we own funding, we have all the funding stuff, we own it, you gotta come to us if you want funding. No, that doesn't work.
How do you, I'm so glad that you went there, because that's where I was going to my mind.
I went to like a meetup on content strategy a while ago, and this exact thing came up, was this idea of ownership of content, and how the user doesn't think in terms of like, I must go to this department in this section in this division of blah. They just want to get their thing, and if that thing needs to be in two places because that's what makes sense, that's cool. But then you get into the whole operational government-y thing of whose job is it, and who touches it, and who owns it, and who doesn't want to own it, and who gets to update it and push it around. How do you get people to work together on that? With
great difficulty. But if there's no metric, if we're not measured, if we have the outside metric like helping people start a business or helping people get funding, and we say, hey, we've only got a 50% success rate, So how are we going, and our target is to get to a 75% success rate. How are we going to do that? Well, we got to distribute the funding to research and innovation, to the education funding. There's got to be a link that goes to education. The climate change funding, it's got to go to climate change. The funding, you know, and this happens and this is what we call the concept of twins. That most problems have two dominant journeys. Sometimes there's triplets, but most of the time there are two dominant journeys. Oh, I think of a condition, or I think of a cost. I think of, oh, you know, I have a heart disease. I look for heart disease, or else I look for waiting times, or else I look for the hospital. You know, there's two dominant journeys in most tasks. So we had a big discussion. We said, is that acceptable? Now we've got a bit of evidence. Is that acceptable? Do we just force people to go to the funding portal because there's nothing that an organization likes more than a portal? Wow, portals, they have dreams of portals, bigger portals, more portals, portals for everyone, you know, in the pro. Nobody really knows what portal means, but it sounds better than website. And I've discovered over the years that a portal is a website that costs you 5 times more. So we have big debates and say, well, you don't want to duplicate the content, so you need to have a home, agreed home, but we need to say, well, you need to link within, there needs to be an appropriate link within search and innovation called research and innovation funding or something, that then links you into the database to the page where there's research and innovation funding in the process. So we got to create a kind of a network-based structure. The content just exists once, but it is linked to appropriately from different places. Is there any questions? Any questions around? Yeah.
I like what you're saying because it brings the people to what they want to get without really having to do the needle in the haystack. But the danger, if it's not well thought through, is the fact that when you put links like that, if you don't link, as you said, to the right place, then you're setting people into a loop. Because they go from one place to one place to one place before they get to what they want.
Well, potentially, but or it's a step. Well, you certainly don't want to create the loop. But if the worst link would be you send them to the home page of the funding portal. But if you send them to the section dealing with research and innovation funding, you know, then they're not in a loop. They are. It's a natural, because if they go to the funding portal, they'll have to select research and innovation. It's actually the same journey, or the same number of steps. It's just one says research and funding, research and innovation. The other is research and innovation funding. But there are two journeys in practically every major problem, and we need to design for both journeys. Because otherwise, people will have gone into research and innovation and spent ages looking for funding and say, there's no funding. You know, there's no research and innovation funding. Because they're zoned. People get really zoned on, they get a model in their brain and they go on that, and they don't think, it's very hard for them to shift their thinking in that. They think about a problem in a certain way. So then we say, yes, this needs to be greened as well. And the implications are A, B, and C, and D, etc. in the process. And this is the model, the twins, the object and the subject. People think of often, I've got a thing, or I've got something I want to do with the thing in the process. That keeps coming up. We see it every time, whether we do it for Cisco, Microsoft, whoever, Toyota, doesn't matter. Keep seeing that. They either think it's a car or a warranty. You know, oh no, I want to check a warranty for the Prius. Oh no, I want to get to the Prius page, then look for warranty. Or no, some people think, oh, I look for a higher level at owner or whatever in the process. So you will discover this. So you've got your sort, now you're testing your hypothesis. Is there? Oh.
Yeah. So as we're creating a lot more cross links, are we going to have a problem with having too much bloat of too many links now to choose from?
You have to be careful. You don't want too many twins. you know, and certainly occasionally you'll have triplets. So you need to be careful. Exactly, you're getting into verging in complexity. But when you're looking at it, when you're looking at research and innovation, and you're saying, well, research and innovation, we know that funding is the number 3 task. So you don't allow families have twins down in the tiny task zones. You know, they get less, it's just harder. But the top tasks get more options in the structure. It's unfair. You know, the top tasks get better treated. So we know that people, law, funding, research and innovation are critical to them. So we're going to give them better treatment, more cross-linking than we will the 76th task. Do you know what the very last task was in the European Union? Find out about the president. You know, that was the president and all the stuff. That was that got 3,000 votes out of 1.6 million votes cast. You know, it was a fraction. It was a fraction of a percent. And that invariably, those tasks at the bottom will get much less cross-linking. But the top task will get more. And you're always, as you say, you're dealing with that. Are we adding to complexity here? But we test, you know, in the process. So, you know, a researcher wants to start a new project, find out an EU grant available, you know, here, and now the next round, it's up. And you see, is it a consistent trend? So typically, you need to do this over 3 rounds, sometimes 4 rounds. So you do your top task to give, well, here's the broad framework that we need to design the structure for. So you pull 20 to 30 tasks out of that. You send it out into a sort. How would you group this stuff? You develop your hypothetical structure. You create your task questions to test this structure. You do it 3 times. You learn each time what you need to tweak, what you need to change in the process. Do we have here? No, I don't. Here's things we learn. I'm just showing you this very briefly. This here, food farming regional development. We knew that was problematic, but we kind of brought it together. There was a bit of an argument. That ended up not working. The tasks just weren't working in this class. So it ended up food and farming and regional development. So we actually had to create 2. It ended up, this is about 14. It ended up being 15 because this grouping just didn't work. So we were getting major failure rates for tasks connected with this. So we had to separate food and farming and you know, and also regional development. So you'll discover, are the classes actually working? Here's another one. Jobs, that was meant for jobs at the EU. We told them it's not going to work. You know, people are going to click on that for looking for a job in another EU country. But we said, okay, let's test it. You know, we knew it wouldn't work, but sometimes you say, okay, let's test it. So the final round, the next round, it was worked really badly, and then they changed it to jobs at working at the European Union or jobs at the European Union. So as you go through the testing, you'll see what's working, what's not working. You'll be doing some twinning, sometimes you'll be changing the language, sometimes you'll be adding a classification, sometimes you might remove a classification because it's very problematic in the process. But at every step of the way, you've got evidence, and you typically go over 3 rounds, and your target is a minimum of 80%, 90%. So how are you successful? A minimum of 80%, people are clicking on the expected links for the most important tasks that they need to complete. Yeah, it's working, it's almost 90%. That's an amazing success rate to achieve for a structure for Europe. We were testing with people all over Europe. Every step of the way, it's evidence, 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 evidence in the process. So that's a quick look at, you know, and that, how we got there, you know, food and farming got separated with regional development, and so these 2 were separated. This became jobs at the European Commission, because jobs on its own didn't work, was confusing. So you learn, your hypothesis, you change it, So you do a sort, you get your top task data, which feeds your sort. No more than about 30 in your sort. Then you get a hypothetical structure from your sort, and then you create a bunch of task questions, simplified. You do a lot of this in Optimal Workshop, or there's lots of tools out there to actually do it, and you go through 3 rounds of testing. Yeah.
There are 2 questions from Slido. The first is, how do you ensure a representative sample size when conducting a task collecting survey? The second one I can read is, how exactly do we measure a user task is completed successfully?
Okay, first question, I should have covered it earlier. We have found that to get really good data on the first phase, the task identification, how many people do you need to get reliable data? About 400. Right. When we did the European Union, it had 107,000, it was an unbelievable number of people who voted. The top 3 tasks, so the top 3 tasks had emerged by 30 voters. It was the same top 3 at 107,000. So the top tasks tend to emerge really quickly. And then as you go out further, the top 5 stabilize, the top 10 roughly stabilize. So we find at about 400, you get quite stable data in the process. So if you want good, solid data from your task identification, you need about 400 people. Minimum of 200, really. And ideally 400 or more. This sort of work, you need very few actually, about 15. It's crazy, it doesn't seem, about 15 people, the rules begin to emerge where they're clicking, where they're not clicking. Ideally we try and get 30 or more people, and sometimes you get bigger samples just to make people feel confident. But at around 15 people is enough to say, yeah, that's not work, they're clicking on funding or they're clicking on research and innovation. So for the task identification, about 400. For this phase of architectural design, 15 to sort, minimum, 15 to vote, and not the same 15. But you want to get roughly the same profile, but not the same 15 people. So a different 15 people every time so there's 4 rounds of interaction in the customer architecture. The sort, and then 3 rounds of testing. The second question I'll come to, I'm just coming to now, we're going to look at how to measure and the best practice in how to measure. Any questions? Anybody done this type of thing or at various levels? What's your experience, or what? Did it work?
Yeah, that's how we design most of our topics. We're doing exactly that.
You do an exact. Great. Can you get the?
Okay, so let's say, okay, so we had over 800 pilots who participated in our tree jack exercise.
Excellent.
So we had a lot of help in ours for that.
Yeah. And I'm sure you found it cuts out debate and opinion, and when you get that evidence coming through, it's very powerful in the process. Anyone else got a question? Okay, good. So let's move on to the next stage of how do we measure? How do we? So we've identified our top tasks. How do we come up with reliable? It's 60% success rate. How do we do that? So you get some sort of a result like this. So you say, oh, it's a 40% failure rate, and here's how long it's taking. And the target time, I'll come to this in a little while, it's not essential, but it's quite useful. Because let's say you've an average for a task, it's taking 4 minutes on average to complete a task. Is that good or bad? Without a target time, if you said, well, but we expect it will take 50 seconds, well then 4 minutes is not so good. We expect it will take 3 minutes, 4 minutes is not so bad. You know, without understanding how long it should take. Oh, they want to change their password. Well, the best practice, that should be doable within 45 seconds. It's taken them 4 minutes. Hey, what's wrong with change a password? You know, in the process. So sometimes a target time will be fed by how does Amazon do it? If it's a very common type of task, you look at, well, what's best practice out there? And you set a target time. There are many ways. I'll touch on how the other ideas in relation to setting a target time. But this gives you a model that says, hey, we want to get up to 80% success rate. Okay, what's causing the failure? What's causing the 40%? So you have two jobs in a way. One is do this reliably so that 60% is a reliable number. Because if you, let's say you run the measurement session again, nothing has changed in the website, and then it becomes 80%, or it becomes 40%, and there was no change, well then obviously your testing method there's some flaw, because you're getting different results and there's been no change in the environment. So how do you get something that this is reliable, so that if you do the measurement sessions in 6 months, and you've not made any changes, you still get 60%. And you still get the roughly similar time patterns coming through in the process. This is a step up from traditional usability. It's more trying to become a management metric. And I'll show you ideas of how to do that and how to move forward. But your next big skill is explaining this. Why this is happening. What causes the 40% and how can it be fixed? So what you want to be able to say, well, the number one reason for that 40% failure rate is, and the number two reason is, and the number three reason is. And here's how we can fix the number one reason. So you need, in any findings, you need to be able to show, here's the results, but here's how we can make it better. Here's what's causing the failure, and here's how. So you're a pattern finder. Your skill is to look at the data that's coming and say, well, what caused the failure in the process? So, most environments that we measure 8 to 12 tasks. So what we do, if we're testing, what's it like to buy a car in Toyota? There's 8 to 12 tasks that will tell you 90% of the story, you know, of the process. Whether you're doing something in a network engineer in Cisco, whatever, there's these top tasks. So you select from your top tasks about 8 to 12 that you're going to measure in the process. Now there's various reasons why it's 8 to 12. One of them being a time constraint. If you ask people in this next round to do more than 12 tasks, they get very tired. So this measurement session is now live. The previous architecture is clicking on a singularized architecture in Optimal Workshop or some other tool. This is on the actual website where you're saying to a network engineer, download the latest firmware for the RV over 2 router. And you're watching them and seeing, can they download that? So these are more difficult tasks in the live environment. More than 10, certainly more than 12, people begin to get tired. You know, roughly, you can do 10 tasks, 10 to 12 tasks in an hour. You ask somebody to do more than an hour of this sort of sessions, testing, they begin to get, their performance begins to drop. So there are certain human limits of what you can ask people. So we're going to go out and we're going to ask a teacher or a nurse or a patient, please do these. I want you over the next hour to try and do these 10 things. Or these 12 things. So you've got a limit of human capability to be able to do these sorts of things. So there's a limit to the number that you can ask people. But 8 to 12 is enough. to give you a real sense of how well the environment is performing. It's the vital statistics of the environment. So you're going to select 8 to 12. How do you select them? You know, you select them based on the top tasks. We check symptoms, etc., etc. Now, you don't necessarily, you might say, oh, this is really important. So instead of this one, so there'll be a little bit of horse trading in the process. But basically, if it's a yellow, it's guaranteed. So if it's in the first 25%, it's guaranteed to get tested. And there's a little bit of debate with management, etc. But okay, if we test task 18, we can't test task 9. So there's a bit of trade-off in the process. It's not absolutely following the data. We've got to listen to strategic imperatives. But your objective is to come up with between 8 and 12 tasks that says, these are what we are going to test, and this is how we're going to judge our environment and the health of our environment and the customer centricity of our environment. So symptoms was a big task here. This is Norwegian hospitals. What happens? Treatment was the big super task here. So we knew, so if it's a really important key task, you might test 2 or 3 treatment tasks in the process. So the first task might get 2 or 3 examples, whereas the other task, so it's not necessarily one task for each one in the link. There's a debate. If there's a really super important task, like in Cisco, downloading software was a super task. So we tested 2 examples of downloading software with people. So here, OECD, the big statistical organization based in Paris. So we talked to them. He says, okay, country surveys, compare country statistical data. That's really important. So we test 2 of those. We test one of these, one of these, one of these. You've got your world. So we're going to, here's the type of task we're going to test. So you got your top task data. You got to go through a decision process. What ones are we going to measure? You need to decide this as a type of a permanent thing, because the key to this session is that you're going to measure the same stuff over time. So you're going to measure, since 2010, every 6 months in Cisco, we have measured download the latest firmware for the RV/over2 router. So we measure the same task over time. The task doesn't change. So therefore, if the time reduces, if the success rate increases, then the environment must have improved. So if you're testing the same task over time, then you'll see, is the environment getting better for the task? So the decision on what these are is very important. You know, this could be the same structure for 5 or 6 years. So it's very important, there's careful agreement. What are the 10 to 12 tasks we are going to measure? Does that make sense? Any questions? There's a... He's got... Sorry.
Yeah, hi. So for Agriculture Canada, we have, one of our top tasks is people looking for information about a specific market or in a specific country. But every year, the specific markets, the product they're looking at changes, and every year, the country changes. So we can track, we can tell you what in a given year, what the focus will be, but we can't measure that same task from year to year because it shifts.
Yeah, but it might, if you've got the same structure, you could construct a task where fit in country, fit in amount of funding, but it's, you know, what is the growth rate or the opening for cheese in, you know, you could create a flat, where in France, you know, you could create a structure of a task that, because all the country pages are treated the same way, that essentially tests the same challenge. It needs careful thinking to get a structure, but it's testing the same essential task year and year. But you just change the country, and you change it from cheese to milk, or from, you know, there's too little, but it's still the same type of task with the same 5 basic steps, and the same expected length of time to actually do it. So if you're careful, you can create a task structure that you can, like, sometimes it's not quite like that, but there was a task in the OECD in 2010, was Vietnam on a list of countries that received official development assistance. So then, when we did it in 2014, it says in 2013 was Vietnam on a list. So there's certain little components you can change that don't change the essence of the task. But sometimes it's not possible, but you try your best. If you can get a consistent task, then the task is not changing. So if the scores are changing, it must be because of a change in the environment. So the more stable you can make the tasks that you measure, the more you can see, because we made that change, the success rate has gone up in the process. So you're really trying to get stability. It's not always possible, but you can get it most of the time. Takes a lot of hard work.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Good question. Okay, so if you want, this is known for 20 years. If you want to identify core underlying problems, it's 5 to 8 people. Sometimes 3 or 4 people. You don't need big, if you've done this, if you do this properly, if you've selected your sample reasonably well, etc., and you've got a really big problem, it's going to come up with about 5 to 8 people. But the thing is, you won't be able to put a number on it. You won't be able to say, that represents a 40% failure rate. At these sort of numbers, you have no stability in your metrics. You're able to say, that's a big problem, but you're not able to in any way quantify the success or the failure rate at the time. So how many people do you need to be able to put a number and to be able to say, that represents a 40% failure rate? How many people do you think?
5 days.
Well, no, 5 to 8 is what will get you. You'll be able to say, that's a big problem. Right, at 5 to 8, you'll be able to say, that's a big problem. But you won't be able to say, that represents a 40% failure rate. 40% of the people are failing because of that. You won't be, it's just not reliable enough. How many more people do you need to get to a reasonably reliable number that says, that's a 40% failure rate? 15. Yeah. It's not that many more. If you go out, and this is funny, we find that 15 is roughly a magic number. 15 for sorting, 15 for tree jack testing, 15 for this. At about 15 people, you are in much more stable territory. And what is really stable is when you roll up the numbers from the 8 to 12 tasks and say the overall average success rate is 40. When you've got from the 8 to 12 tasks and testing with 15 people, that number is very stable. You've got a very stable number coming out of that. If you did nothing in the website and tested it 12 months later, you'd still have roughly a 60%. You'd still have practically the exact same score that you had 12 months. Now you're in management territory. You've got a metric that will remain constant unless there's a change in the environment. That's management. Otherwise, you're saying, no, that's a problem. I can't quantify it, but it's a problem. When you can put number on things, you get listened to far more. When you can go to management and say, this represents a 40% failure rate, in other words, we estimate that 15,000 people a week are failing at this. Because you can turn the 40% into how many people are failing. Once you get numbers, you transform the conversation. If you say, oh, the form is, people don't like the form, people are having problems with the form, nobody's going to listen to you. But if you can say, that form is causing a 40% failure rate, resulting in 1,500 support calls, that's a different conversation. So we're trying to get to a place where we've got numbers based on the customer experience. We don't need to go that much higher than the old model of 5 to 8. We go out to about 15, 20 people maximum. We begin to get quite stable numbers for success rate, for time on task. So there's
How do you measure task completion?
Well, that's it. Well, you measure it. You download the latest firmware for the RV/over2 router. You know, did they download it? Did more people die of heart attacks in Canada than in France in 2004? Can you please find me the answer? Oh, more people died in Canada. You know, in 2008 was Vietnam on the list of countries that received official assistance? Right? Yes. No.
How about applying for a visa? How do I know they've applied for a visa?
Well, you might. So you break up. You say you might break up that task into a representative blanket and say, do you qualify? You're an Irish person. Do you need it? Right. So you might break up that task into a number of discrete components. How much do you need? How much do you pay? Get to the page, not to apply, but you know, you go into discrete components of maybe subtasks of the super task. We did Cisco Commerce, where they buy massive data centers, millions and millions of dollars. So we broke it up into say, oh, you've got a support contract for 24-hour support. Remove that contract from your overall service contract. So remove that. So you don't want that support. Take off the renewal of that. So you're add. You've got, and we'd have these pre-done things. You've got this spec. You want to add an extra router system. To add that, so we'd attack discrete elements of, because the overall one is too long or too complicated. So you can break it up into little segments and components that reflect critical choke points or areas that if don't work, you know, the overall task is going to fail. So some tasks are too complicated, so you need to break them up into discrete components. Does it?
Sorry, I have a lot of questions.
Great, questions are great.
So, I'm curious about like the actual logistics of how you're doing this user testing. I understand there's a bunch of different ways to approach it. Are you doing like an on-screen pop-up of like, why are you here today? Are you putting people in a room and watching them use your product? How are you doing
I'll
this?
show you. Yeah, we're coming to that. We're coming. No, great question. This is crucial to the quality of the result. You know, of how the session is. But we're coming to that mechanism for sure. So I'll definitely address that. Okay. So we've done tons and tons of these studies over the years. So we did an analysis, a whole bunch of these tests. So we saw, you know, at this environment, the success rate really begins to, over here, 3 to 5, it's, you know, there's loads of fluctuations. It could be here, it could be up here. You know, the variance is quite significant. But at about 15 people, about 13 to 15 people, it really begins to get a consistent type of number, keeps it 60% or whatever it is in the process. So we've seen this through hundreds and hundreds of these measurement sessions, that as you get out to 15, obviously there's a load of other factors, how you measure it, that could really corrupt this data. But if you're doing it professionally, if you're doing it rigorously, if you're doing it the same way every time, these sorts of patterns begin to emerge, and these sorts of stabilizations begin to emerge in the process. So, the instructions. How do you create, so you got a top task, download software. That's the overall task. But how do you create an instruction? So here's just a few guides, because the instruction is one of the most dangerous things that you do. Because it's an experiment. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. We do it remotely moderated, right? Using WebEx or GoToMeeting. Right? So professional, unmoderated doesn't get you good results. Gets you volume but not quality. Right? You cannot get solid metric. Unmoderated is great if you're attacking a very specific problem and you want to make the form better or stuff like that. And you want to get lots of ideas. But to get a management metric unmoderated is not good. It's not good for a whole bunch of reasons, right? You need professional moderation. It is remote based. The biggest piece of noise in the experiment in a remotely moderated test is the instruction. So what you're trying to achieve is almost like a time and motion study, where the moderator is very quiet, not interruptive, there's no talk aloud, you're just trying to become invisible very quickly after you've given the instruction to the person. So what you're trying to replicate is as close to the natural environment as possible. That using their computer, in their home, in their office. The biggest piece of noise that goes into the environment is the instruction, because you paste it into the chat box and it comes on their screen. So this is something that's not normally there when they're trying to download software. This is an artificial stuff introduced into the environment. So the way the task is phrased can have a huge impact on the person's behavior. They will look at those words that you paste into the box like a an absolute detective and say, oh, what is this instruction? And they'll try and take bits of it and put it into search. They will look for clues within the instruction. It's just natural human behavior patterns. So you're really trying to create an instruction which is not leading as possible. So a bad instruction would be on an intranet, find a maternity leave policy. That's a terrible instruction, because it's called the maternity leave policy. They'll search for maternity leave. You've led them to the answer. You've given them the answer in the instruction. You might as well not do the testing. It's useless. It's worse. In fact, it's leading you in wrong direction. You say, oh, it's great. Policies are great. So what would be a much better instruction? So find the maternity leave policy. What would be a much better way to phrase that? Anyone have an idea? How many months do you get? Something like that. Or your colleague is pregnant, because male, female, that you make a joke. How many months can she take off? So no word in it. So often one of the key things we do, when we get an instruction, we test it rigorously with the search. And if it's bringing up the right result first with any combination of the words, we change the language in the instruction. So one of the key things you do with an instruction is you test it in a search engine, taking little bits of it, putting it in, and say, oh, that's bringing them straight to the first. You got to change the instruction. The instruction is it's anti-search engine optimization. You're trying to make it meaningful, but in no way keyword heavy. That's not easy. It takes skill to build it. It needs to be understandable, but not full of keywords that will lead them to because otherwise you've artificially influenced the performance of the task. The experiment has corrupted, the environment in the process. Does that make sense? It's very difficult to write good, simple instructions. You will not do this in week one. You will take quite a bit of time to get this well. But it's a skill, right? There's a question there, Bert? No, it's okay. He's right there.
Thanks. Pardon my ignorance. I think I'm a little lost. We didn't hear the answer back here. At least I didn't. Don't want to speak for too many people around me. But what was a better way of asking the question?
The better way of asking the question. So find the maternity leave policy. Bad.
So could you say, you're about to have a baby?
Yeah, or your colleague is pregnant. It's not so good to say you're about to have a baby, because if you're testing men as well, that's, so you want it.
Someone you know is about to have a baby.
So you try and make it, your colleague is pregnant or something, how many months can she take off?
That not leading? Is the pregnant or months taking off, that's not too leading?
Well, you test it. But it's, and you see, if you take months taking off, how many months can you take off? You put that into the search. If it brings you straight, if the first result is maternity leave policy, you need to reword it. But it's much better than maternity leave policy, which is exactly what the thing is called. Then if they go and search for maternity leave, fine. You know, but that's been their deliberate decision. It wasn't because the word was included in the task. So you try and create something that's neutral in its phraseology.
Very clear. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, there's another question. I'm just curious how the microphone works.
So for that top task, I kind of doubt that maternity leave was kind of like the top task itself. It was probably more about policies in general. So how would you go about picking those variables, inserting them in the task itself?
Yeah, you want, and this is part of, you want typical. If you know policies are dear, you don't want a really unusual policy. You start with really common policies. You find, well, what are the biggest, what's the highest demand policy? This is not an exam to get into university. You're not trying to trick people. You're not trying to come up, oh, let's come up with a really unusual policy that's kept in this tiny little database here. No, let's come up with the most common, because then when you come back and you deliver the results, you say, they can't even find the most basic policies. You know, your leave, you know, your holidays, something that's really common that you say, oh, what sort of policy questions are coming up really frequently? Let's do something around that. So don't choose difficult. Representative, typical, and ideally fixable. So you don't want to frame a task that you know is impossible to fix. It needs to buy, you know, a big new content management system. Because that will deflate the team that gets the results that say, yeah, but there's nothing we can do about it. So when you're starting off, you try and create tasks that you think there is an ability to actually change and improve in the environment. There's a lot of variables here. It's not always possible to get all of them right. And it'll take you time to get good at these things. But now is the time to be really getting good at these methods and how you frame these tasks.
When you run a moderated test and you get the results back and say the results are better than you expected, is there a way to know if that is because the content is okay or it's an artifact of the task?
Well, I think, see, the task is blind to whether it's content or application or whatever. But in all likelihood, you will see, and this is your biggest skill, you will be observing 15 people. The skill that will get you the best career in this future is to see the patterns. So if you can say, hey, it really worked. Step 2, they spent very little time there because that page worked really well. They were a bit slower on step 3 because we think you're looking for the patterns. You're not looking for, oh, one person did this. You say, well, 5, 6, you're looking for the patterns of behavior. Or most people move through step 2 with no problem. It was really clear, but they stumbled a bit on step 3. It took them longer, they were more confused, so we lost a bit of time at step 3 of the process. And then I wonder why? What caused that, etc. Well, we think it's because you're giving an educated guess, but that's a hypothesis which then you'll test the next time around. So you're judging the task regardless of whether its success is based on content, application, or whatever. There is no, this is measuring the journey, not the content per se or the application per se, it's measuring the journey. And your job is to identify the patterns. What are the dominant patterns? Either the successful ones or the failure-based ones. Because if they're successful ones, you say, well, why can't we do that for other forms? Now that really worked for that form. Oh, let's apply that to the other forms in the process. Little things that we discover is most people don't know what asterisks are in forms. They never follow, the mandatory fields. Everybody thinks everybody knows, and they don't. When you test people, they don't even look at the little asterisks. In the program. But everybody, that's been like that for 25 years. Nobody's understood it for 25 years. There's stuff that we just assume everybody knows. And they don't. You know, so representative typical. So download the latest firmware for the RV over 2 router. The RV over 2, it's not an unusual one. It's one of their biggest sellers. It's one of their big, and also if it's a constant one, if it's a big seller, chances are it'll be there next year and the year after. If it's a very unusual router, it might not be there next year. So you start with the common stuff, and if that's failing big time, wow. You have the really essential stuff that is delivering most of the value. If there's a 60% failure rate on that, the signals go up the management chain. But if it's a very unusual thing, people attack you and say, oh, well, you just chose an unusual. Most people don't do that type of policy. That policy is rarely looked up. It kind of weakens your argument. But if it's a real common policy that's being checked up every week, wow, and there's a 60% failure rate on that, then we get, you get a different sort of approach. Repeatability, I've been talking about this. It's very important we can repeat this over time. This user experience is not a once-off activity. It's a consistent, continuous improvement model. So you want to be testing the same task every 6 months, every 12 months. And how often should you test based on your ability to make changes? There's no point in testing again if you haven't made any change, because you're going to get the same result. So you'll frame the testing based on your capacity to actually change based on the findings from the previous round of testing. But repeatability is critical to this model. It's critical to management. You need to test the same basic thing over time. So it's critical we get repeatable tasks. So here, 2008, in 2000, so you might change little things in the task, but essentially it's the same task coming through in the process. No hidden clues. I've talked about this already. This corrupting the actual measurement session based on how the task instruction has been structured is the #1 reason we see for failure in the process. So we talked about that. So simplicity, they talk about attention spans and how attention spans are less than goldfish. Do you know goldfish have perfectly good memories? There's actually no scientific evidence that goldfish have short attention spans. We just assume that's a good story that we tell, but there's actually no scientific evidence that goldfish have poor memory. The poor goldfish, they've been discriminated against and prejudiced, and insulted for so many years about not having a memory. And they've got just as good a memory as any other fish. But humans have a challenge. So if you've got a very long task and you're pasting that into a chat box, very hard to remember. You want to get it short enough so that it can embed in short-term memory. So generally, you keep it under 30 words maximum. Sometimes you have very complicated tasks, you have to go to 30 words. If you can go to 20, 10 words even better. The less words in the instruction, the less people will be jumping back to their chat box saying, well, what were you asking me to do? What were you asking me to do? What were you asking me to do? That's a disruption. Your time is losing its quality. If they're constantly moving back, reading the instruction, how do you measure time? So the more they can immediately, I know exactly what you want me to do, they don't need to read back, so the shorter it is, the better. A big, long task, very difficult for somebody to remember what you asked them once they've done 2 or 3 clicks. This lady here, Eric, just behind.
French is typically 20% longer than English. If you're talking 30 words in English, you're probably talking around 35 in French. Do we want to go there, or do we want to cut it to 35 in French?
Well, I think 30 words, I would say, is the real outside limit. So after that, it's a real challenge for people to remember in the process. So if you're looking at those outside limits, maybe you're saying, I don't know how exactly some languages longer actual words, but if you're at 35 words in any language, you're really beginning to get into a complex type of instruction in the process. I would say in both languages try and keep it under 30 words, even though you've got that natural complexity. There will always be exceptions, but I say 30 maximum. 20, if you can get it at 10, even better. Download the latest firmware for the RV/2 router. It's a complex task. There's only 12 words or so in the process. So a lot of work to get it short and focused in the process. What you next wants to do, right? I've just barely touched task instructions, but is create a journey. You're going to create this journey. You're going to say, well, we got our instruction. Find a document that gives you the 10 key benefits of NetApp SnapVault, which is the top task is data protection. SnapVault is a data protection product, right? Then you say, where do we expect people to go? You create the expected customer journey, right? So you say, well, we expect them to go here. We expect. So you get the organization internally. Well, what is the optimal journey? So you create the expected journey in the process. Again, it's a hypothesis. So when you get the results back, you can say, well, nobody went that way. So you've got a debate. Well, what's our expectation? Well, we expect them to go here, and then we expect this would be the optimal way to do it. And then you come back and say, well, nobody did it that way. So your expected journey is crap. Because nobody does it that way. But it's good to do this before the measurement happens. So you work with your team. Well, where do you, if they want to download the RV/2 router, where do you expect them to go? So you write down, you get an agreement internally on the expected journey. Then you can say, yeah, it worked. Or the first 3 steps of it worked. But then after that, it didn't work. So then you're challenging mental model and saying, well, the way we think customers do this is not the way they're doing it, or trying to do it in the process. So it's very good to create an expected journey. And what that feeds as well, can really help with, is the target time. Or getting a sense of the target time. So, then you'd measure the journey to get there and say, well, that should take 50 seconds, shouldn't it? If they go that way. So then if they're taking 4 or 5 minutes, there's something wrong. They're not going on the journey that we expected them to go on. So I talked about target time. That it's not essential, but it's quite useful. When you're starting off, it's not essential to do target time, but it's quite useful as you mature in the environment. They say, how long should this task take? How long would we normally expect that it should take a customer to do this? Oh, it should take 45 seconds. Well, it's actually taking 5 minutes. Wow, why? How do we get it close to the target time in the process? How do we do what I talked about here? Remote. We found the best way. Yep. Sorry.
How many people go right to search? Or do you say you can't use search?
No, absolutely not. I'll explain. So when you're doing a session, you say to somebody, typically you have a start page. You have to have a start page. So everybody should start on the same place, right? Now the perfect start place is a blank tab. Or if it's an application, whatever, before you load the application. So the most pure start point is a blank tab. And you say, go wherever you want. Just you open a tab in your browser, blank tab, and say, we're going to close all the tabs. Every task is going to start on a blank tab. So you do whatever you want to do in the process.
So typically what percentage of people would go directly?
It really depends on the task. certain tasks, it depends where you start and it depends on the task. Right. The blank tab is great, but for most organizations it's not a good idea because they'll never even get to your website, so you'll never even learn much from it. Most environments, we start on the home page just for practical reasons of the organization's website. Now, we say to them, we're going to start every task on the home page, but you can use Google, you can do whatever you want. So for practical, in the perfect world, it's blank tab. In the practical world, it's usually the home page is the starting point. Now, if the home page is the starting point and the navigation is good, you can get between 60 and 70% of people going to navigation as a first attempt. People actually prefer to navigate and look. If they're looking for a price and you've got a link that says pricing, you know, it's easier to click on the link than to make the search. Now, if they're doing a very complex troubleshooting task, they'll automatically, there are certain types of tasks that are search dominant. There are certain type of tasks that are navigation dominant. And as you do lots of measurements, you'll begin to say, that's a search dominant task in the process. But again, the behavior depends on the starting point. If it's a blank tab, probably 90% will start with search. You know, there's different behaviors depending on where you start the actual sessions. But actually, people navigate far more than they search. See, this is the thing. If we were to measure the quantity of navigation that happens every day, the amount of people clicking on links, there's far more of that behavior than there is search behavior. It's just search behavior is much more visible. There's far more people clicking on links and moving between things than there is people searching, even though there's huge quantities of people searching. So when we're testing Cisco, engineers, if the structure is good, 60% of the time they'll go to the architecture to download the software or to configure the router. If you've got a good configuration journey, a good download journey, well designed, they'll go to that. Why search when you can click on download software? And then you got to drop down, choose your router, etc. Why would you search? It's easier and faster often to navigate. You get a better result coming through. So I think we should have. We're 10 minutes over. Yeah, we'll come back at 10 past. We're still on time. We'll still be covered, but we've got some good questions there. So 5 to, yeah, we'll come back at 10 past.